I always looked forward to hitting the road with my son, Tom. Just the two of us, rolling down the highway, making memories. But this time was different. We were driving through West Virginia on our way to visit some family, and everything that could go wrong was going wrong. The AC in the car had died, leaving us to stew in the sticky August heat. Tom, who's 9, was getting fidgety, and I wasn't in the mood to play car games. The combination of exhaustion, heat, and general frustration was building, and I just needed a break from the endless miles of road. We'd been on the road for hours, only stopping briefly to refuel, and both of us were in desperate need of a bathroom break. When I spotted a sign for a rest stop a few miles ahead, it felt like a blessing. Finally, we could stretch our legs, cool down, and get some air that wasn't boiling hot. The rest stop wasn't exactly inviting. It was one of those places that looks like it hasn't seen maintenance in a decade. The parking lot was half empty, with a few trucks scattered around. The building itself was small, with weather-beaten siding and cracked windows. Not the worst I've seen, but not exactly the kind of place you'd want to linger. Tom, of course, didn't care. He just wanted out of the car. He hopped out almost as soon as I put the car in park, running toward the restroom area before I could even tell him to stay close. I watched him go, trying to shake off the irritation that had been hanging over me all day. I figured I'd let him burn off some energy while I used the bathroom myself. As I walked toward the building, I had this strange feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't anything obvious, just the sense that everything was too quiet. Even the few people milling around didn't seem like they belonged, but I brushed it off. I just wanted to get back on the road. When we were back in the car, I noticed a white pickup truck a few spaces down. There was a guy inside, a man in his 50s or so, just sitting there looking like he had nothing better to do. His eyes followed us as we backed out of the spot, but I didn't think much of it. People stare. It's what they do. We got back on the highway, and things seemed to settle down. Tom was finally quiet, staring out the window, and I started to feel a little better with the windows rolled down. The wind wasn't as good as AC, but it was something. I started thinking about what we'd do once we got to our destination. Maybe grab some dinner, relax for the evening. The rest stop was already fading from my mind. About 10 minutes down the road, I saw that same white pickup truck in my rearview mirror. It was definitely following us a little too closely for comfort. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. The guy must have gotten back on the road the same time we did. But after a few more miles, it was clear he wasn't just going in the same direction. He was following us. I tried to shake him off by speeding up, but the truck kept pace. Slowing down didn't help either. He adjusted his speed to match mine, staying at the same distance behind us no matter what I did. My irritation was creeping back in, along with something else. Something worse. "What's that truck doing, Dad?" Tom asked from the back seat. "I don't know, bud. Probably just some guy not paying attention," I said, trying to keep my tone light. No point in freaking him out. But deep down, I wasn't buying my own explanation. I needed to figure out what this guy's deal was. After a few more miles, the pickup finally pulled up alongside us, matching our speed. I looked over, and the driver was staring directly at me. His face twisted in urgency. He was waving his hand, trying to get me to roll down my window. I hesitated. The last thing I wanted to do was interact with some random stranger, especially one who'd been tailing us for miles. But his expression wasn't aggressive. He looked scared, or at least concerned. Right knowing it wasn't the smartest move, I cracked the window just enough to hear him. "There's something in your car," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. "What?" "The back seat. Check your back seat." At first, I didn't understand what he was saying, but then his words hit me like a freight train. The back seat. Tom. I turned around, my heart leaping into my throat. Tom was sitting there, perfectly still, staring out the window. But just beyond him on the far side of the back seat, I saw the shadow of something, lurking just out of view. My body went cold. I hit the brakes, swerving onto the shoulder as quickly as I could. The pickup truck followed, pulling off the road behind me. I threw the car into park, my hands shaking as I unbuckled my seatbelt and turned fully around to face the back seat. Before I could say anything, the back door flung open and a figure bolted out of the car, It was a man, looking worn down, wearing tattered clothes. He didn't look back as he sprinted across the highway and disappeared into the thick trees on the other side. I just sat there, stunned. It took a few seconds to process what had just happened. "Dad?" Tom's voice was shaky. "Who was that?" I didn't know how to answer. I just reached over and pulled him close, checking to make sure he was all right. He seemed fine, just shaken up like I was. I looked back toward the highway, but the man was long gone. The guy from the pickup truck came running over. "Are you okay? Did you see him?" I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. "Yeah, I saw him." We stayed on the side of the road for a while, long enough to explain the situation to the guy in the pickup and gather ourselves. Tom kept asking who the man was and why he'd gotten into our car, but I didn't have any answers. All I knew was that somewhere between the rest stop and the highway, a complete stranger had climbed into the back seat of our car, hiding under our backpacks and coats, and he stayed there for miles without us knowing. The man from the pickup said he noticed it right after we pulled out from the rest stop. He saw the guy slipping into the car when I wasn't looking. I guess I was too distracted by the heat, the drive, and everything else. And I hadn't thought to check the back seat when Tom got in. We didn't call the police. By the time I thought to, the intruder was long gone, and honestly, I didn't want to relive the whole thing. I just wanted to get back on the road. As we drove away, I kept checking the back seat in the rearview mirror, but of course it was just Tom, looking out the window, lost in his thoughts. Neither of us talked much for the rest of the trip. There wasn't much to say. Every time I think back on that drive, I still wonder who that guy was and what he intended to do. All I know is that we got lucky. Lucky that the guy in the pickup saw him, and lucky that we didn't find out the hard way what he was capable of. I had been driving for hours. The rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt was the only sound breaking the oppressive silence of the night. It was just past midnight, and I found myself on a remote stretch of highway, miles away from the nearest town. The moon, obscured by thick clouds, offered little illumination. My headlights cut through the darkness, but beyond that, it was an endless abyss. I glanced at the gas gauge and felt a knot tighten in my stomach. It was dangerously low. I hadn't seen a gas station for miles, and the thought of being stranded out here was terrifying. I checked my phone, no signal. Of course, I thought, just my luck. I decided to press on, hoping to find a gas station or at least a sign pointing to civilization. The minutes dragged on, and with each passing moment, my anxiety grew. The road was eerily empty. Not a single car had passed by in either direction. My mind began to play tricks on me. Every shadow seemed to move, and every rustle in the distance felt like a predator waiting to pounce. I turned up the radio, trying to drown out my thoughts, but all I got was static. Great. As I continued driving, I noticed something in the distance. Headlights. Relief washed over me. Another car meant I wasn't alone out here. But as the car approached, I felt a twinge of unease. The headlights were bright, almost blinding, and the car was moving fast. Too fast. The car zoomed past me, its high beams illuminating the interior of my car for a split second. I caught a glimpse of the driver, a man, staring straight ahead, his face expressionless. As the car disappeared into the darkness, I breathed a sigh of relief. But that relief was short-lived. In my rearview mirror, I saw the car's brake lights flare up. It was slowing down. Panic set in. Why was it slowing down? Was the driver lost, or was something more sinister at play? The car came to a complete stop before turning around and heading back in my direction. My heart pounded in my chest. This can't be good. I pressed down on the accelerator, my car lurching forward. The other car matched my speed, its headlights glaring in my mirrors. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the road ahead, but my eyes kept darting to the mirror. The car was tailgating me now, its high beams blinding me. I swerved into the other lane, hoping to let the car pass, but it stayed right behind me. I accelerated again, pushing my car to its limits. The engine roared, and the tires screeched against the asphalt, but the other car remained glued to my bumper. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this some kind of prank, or was I in real danger? The road began to twist and turn, and I struggled to maintain control at such high speeds. The car behind me mimicked my every move. its driver determined to stay on my tail. I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. I needed to find help, or at least a place to hide. In the distance, I spotted a flickering light, a gas station. Relief and fear mingled in my chest. I didn't know if the station was open or if anyone would be there, but it was my only hope. I veered off the highway, my tires skidding on the gravel as I pulled into the station's lot. I jumped out of the car, leaving the engine running, and sprinted toward the small building. The gas station was old and run down, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a horror movie. The flickering neon sign cast an eerie glow over the lot. I banged on the door, praying someone would answer. Behind me, I heard the other car pull in, its engine idling ominously. I turned and saw the driver step out. He was tall and wore a dark hoodie, his face obscured by the hood. My heart raced as he began to walk toward me. "Please help me," I shouted, pounding on the door again. The driver continued his slow, deliberate approach. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like lead. Just as the man reached the bottom of the steps, the door behind me creaked open. An elderly man with a kind but weary face peered out. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice trembling. I turned to him, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "This man, he's been following me. I think he's trying to hurt me." The old man looked past me to the driver, who had stopped at the bottom of the steps, his face still hidden. "You need to leave," the old man said, his voice firm despite the fear I saw in his eyes. For a moment, the driver didn't move. He simply stared at us, his presence exuding menace. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back to his car. I watched as he got in, started the engine, and drove off into the night. The old man ushered me inside and locked the door behind us. "You're safe now," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. He watched through the window as the car's taillights disappeared down the road. I spent the rest of the night at the gas station, too shaken to drive. The old man kept me company, his presence a small comfort in the wake of the terror I had just experienced. He told me stories of the highway, of the strange and dangerous people who sometimes wandered through. But nothing he said could explain the man who had followed me or what he wanted. The next morning I thanked the old man and left, my car's gas tank filled and my nerves still frayed. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man in the hoodie was still out there, waiting. The highway seemed to stretch on forever, and with every mile I felt the shadows closing in around me. I learned a valuable lesson that night. Always be vigilant on the road, because you never know what or who you might bump into on the road. Be careful out there. The highway stretched out before us, seemingly endless and devoid of other travelers. The air was filled with the soft hum of our car's engine and the occasional chirping of crickets from the fields that flanked the road. I was behind the wheel, and my friends were engaged in a spirited discussion about the best horror movies. We were headed to a secluded cabin in the mountains for a weekend getaway, eager for a break from our daily routines. As the sky darkened, we spotted a dilapidated rest stop up ahead. Its neon sign flickered weakly, half of the letters burned out. The structure looked abandoned, but we were all eager to stretch our legs and use the bathroom before continuing our journey. "Do you think it's open?" Megan asked, squinting at the sign. "Only one way to find out," I replied, turning into the rest stop's cracked and overgrown parking lot. We got out of the car, the evening air cool and still. The rest stop was eerily silent, the only sound the distant rustling of leaves. The building was small, with boarded-up windows and a faded sign that read restrooms. "This place gives me the creeps," Lily said, hugging herself. "Come on, it's probably fine," Jason said, though his voice lacked conviction. We approached the building, the gravel crunching under our feet. I pushed open the door, which creaked loudly, revealing a dimly lit interior. The air inside was musty, and the flickering fluorescent lights cast an eerie glow. As we stepped inside, I felt a chill run down my spine. The restrooms were at the back, and the doors to both were slightly ajar. I motioned for Megan to follow me to the men's room, while Jason and Lily headed to the women's. The restroom was in a state of disrepair, with cracked tiles and a broken mirror. I used the urinal quickly, eager to get out of there. As I washed my hands, I heard a faint whisper, almost too soft to catch. Megan, did you hear that? I asked, turning to her. Hear what? She replied, her brow furrowing. It sounded like a whisper, I said, straining to listen. But the sound was gone. We regrouped outside, and I noticed Jason and Lily looked just as uneasy as we felt. Did you guys hear anything strange in there? I asked. Yeah, Jason said, nodding. It sounded like someone whispering, but there was no one else in the restroom. A sense of unease settled over us. But we brushed it off, attributing it to our imaginations running wild in the creepy setting. We decided to grab some snacks from the vending machines before heading back to the car. The vending machines were located in a small alcove at the side of the building. As we approached, I saw a shadow move out of the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Did you see that? I asked, my voice shaking slightly. See what? Megan asked, looking around. I thought I saw a shadow, I replied, scanning the area. Let's just get our snacks and go, Jason said, his voice tense. We fumbled with the vending machines, the old buttons sticking as we made our selections. As we waited for the machines to dispense our snacks, I heard the whisper again, louder this time. Who's there? I called out, my heart pounding. Silence was the only reply. We quickly gathered our snacks and made our way back to the car, the fun atmosphere of our road trip now replaced with a heavy sense of dread. We got in the car and locked the doors, our eyes scanning the darkening surroundings. Let's just get to the cabin, Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. I started the car, but it wouldn't turn over. The engine sputtered and died. Come on, I muttered, trying again. The car remained stubbornly silent. This can't be happening, Megan said, her voice tinged with panic. We can't be stuck here. As I kept trying to start the car, Jason and Lily kept watch, their eyes darting around nervously. The air felt thick, and the darkness seemed to close in around us. Just when we thought it couldn't get worse, the whisper returned, louder and more insistent. We need to get out of here, I said, my voice shaking. Maybe there's someone nearby who can help. We got out of the car and decided to check the rest stop's office. It was a long shot, but we had no other options. We moved as a group, sticking close together, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The office door was locked, but Jason found a rock and smashed the window. We climbed inside, the sound of the glass breaking echoing eerily in the still night. The office was just as run down as the rest of the building, with papers scattered everywhere and a thick layer of dust covering everything. As we searched for anything useful, the whispering grew louder, now accompanied by faint footsteps. My heart pounded as I rifled through the desk drawers. Before we could leave, the footsteps stopped right outside the office door. We froze, the air thick with tension. The door creaked open slowly, and a figure stood silhouetted against a weak light from the hallway. It was a man, his clothes tattered and his eyes wild. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice rough and edged with panic. "We're just trying to leave," I said, my voice trembling. "Our car won't start, and we thought we might find help here." The man stepped closer, and I could see the fear in his eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They don't like visitors." Without another word, he turned and ran down the hallway. We bolted from the office, the keys clutched tightly in my hand. We ran back to the car, the whispering now a cacophony around us. I fumbled with the keys, finally getting them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I didn't waste a second. We sped out of the rest stop, the dilapidated building receding into the distance. We drove in silence, the fear slowly giving way to relief. As the lights of the next town came into view, I finally allowed myself to breathe. We pulled into a well-lit gas station. As we filled up the tank and grabbed more snacks, we recounted what had happened. None of us could explain the whispers or the footsteps, but we all agreed on one thing: we were lucky to have gotten out of there. The rest of the trip was uneventful, but the memory of that night stayed with us. The sun was beginning to set as we made our way down this deserted road. The road was surrounded by nothing but dry, cracked earth and the occasional tumbleweed. We were miles away from the nearest town, our car the only sign of life for as far as the eye could see. The air was hot and still, the only sound the steady hum of the engine. I was driving with my girlfriend Sarah beside me and our friends Mike and Jenny in the back. We had decided to take a scenic route on our way to a weekend camping trip, hoping to avoid the usual highway traffic. It had seemed like a good idea at the time, but now, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, I was beginning to have second thoughts. We were in the middle of nowhere when we spotted the car. It was an old, beat-up sedan, its hood up in steam pouring out from the engine. A woman stood beside it, waving frantically as we approached. "Should we stop?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with concern. I hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, let's see if she needs help." I pulled over to the side of the road and we all got out, the hot, dry air hitting us like a wall. The woman hurried over, relief evident on her face. "Thank you so much for stopping," she said, her voice trembling. "My car broke down and I have no cell service out here. Can you help me?" I walked over to the car and peered under the hood. The engine was overheated, steam hissing from the radiator. "Looks like your radiator's busted," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. "We can give you a ride to the nearest town if you'd like." The woman nodded, her eyes darting nervously to the surrounding desert. "That would be great, thank you." We helped her gather a few belongings from her car and piled back into ours. As we started down the road again, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The woman's nervousness seemed to increase the further we drove, and she kept glancing out the window, as if expecting someone or something to appear. About 10 minutes into the drive, we saw it. A pickup truck parked by the side of the road, its headlights flashing. Two men stood beside it, one of them waving his arms to flag us down. "What now?" Mike muttered from the back seat. "Maybe they need help too," Sarah suggested, though her voice was uncertain. Reluctantly, I pulled over again. The two men approached the car, their expressions hard to read in the fading light. "Hey, we're having some trouble with our truck," one of them said. "Mind giving us a hand?" I got out of the car, my nerves on edge. There was something about the men's demeanor that made me uneasy. They were too calm, too composed, given the situation. As soon as I got out of the car, Sarah got into the driver's seat, just in case we needed to escape. As I walked over to the truck, I noticed the woman in our car stiffened, her eyes widening with fear. "Don't trust them," she whispered urgently. "They're dangerous." I turned to her, confused. "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, one of the men lunged at me, his grip iron tight. As I sat back in the car and drive, he growled, his breath hot against my ear. Panic surged through me. I tried to break free, but the man's grip was unyielding. The other man approached, his expression twisted with malevolence. Sarah, Mike, and Jenny were shouting from the car, their voices a chaotic blend of fear and confusion. "Do as he says," the woman screamed. "They're going to rob us." With a burst of adrenaline, I managed to wrench myself free and sprint back to the car. "Go, go!" I shouted as I dove into the passenger seat. Sarah slammed on the gas, the tires screeching as we sped away. The men ran after us for a few steps before stopping, their figures shrinking in the rearview mirror. The relief was short-lived. In the mirror, I saw the pickup truck's headlights flare to life. They were following us. "Drive faster." Jenny cried, her voice high with panic. "I'm trying," Sarah replied, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. The truck was gaining on us, its engine roaring like a predator closing in on its prey. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. We were still miles from the nearest town, and our car wasn't built for speed. "Turn off the road," I shouted, pointing to a narrow dirt path that veered off into the desert. Sarah hesitated for a moment before yanking the wheel to the right. We barreled down the path, the car bouncing and jolting over the rough terrain. The truck followed, its headlights illuminating the landscape in a sickly yellow glow. "Looking for a place to hide," Mike said, his voice shaking. Up ahead, I spotted a cluster of rocks and scrub brush. "There," I pointed. "We can hide behind those rocks." Sarah turned the car toward the rocks, and we slid to a stop behind the largest boulder. We killed the engine and the lights, holding our breath as the truck roared past, its headlights sweeping the area before continuing down the path. We sat in silence, the only sound our ragged breathing. The woman was trembling, tears streaming down her face. "I told you not to trust them," she whispered. "They're part of a gang that preys on travelers." "How do you know?" Mike asked, his voice low. "I was one of their victims," she replied, her voice breaking. "I escaped, but they caught up with me. We stayed hidden behind the rocks for what felt like hours, the darkness pressing in around us. Every rustle of the wind, every creak of the car seemed amplified, our nerves stretched to the breaking point. Just as we were beginning to think it was safe to leave, the truck reappeared. It had doubled back, its headlights sweeping the area in search of us. The men got out, flashlights in hand, and began to scour the landscape. My heart pounded in my chest as they drew closer, their voices carrying on the still night air. "They can't have gone far," one of them said. "Keep looking." We crouched lower, trying to stay out of sight. But as the men approached our hiding spot, I knew we couldn't stay hidden much longer. In a desperate move, I grabbed a rock and hurled it into the distance. The sound of it crashing through the brush drew the men's attention, and they ran toward the noise. Now I whispered urgently, "Get in the car and go." We scrambled back into the car, trying to make as little noise as possible. Sarah started the engine, and we crept away from the rocks, the truck's headlights receding in the distance. We drove in silence, the tension in the car palpable. No one spoke until we saw the lights of the town up ahead. Belief washed over us as we pulled into a gas station, the bright lights and the presence of other people a welcome sight. The woman got out, her face a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking. "You saved my life." We called the police, who took our statements and promised to investigate the gang. As we watched the woman leave with the officers, we couldn't shake the feeling of lingering dread. As we continued our journey, the events of that night stayed with us. If these horror stories had you gripping the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling tales. Stay safe out there, and remember, the next time you hit the road, danger might be closer than you think. Thanks for watching.